I'm Jordan Hale, 32. My brother told me I was too broke to buy a house. 7 days from that moment, his mortgage company would call me the deed to his mansion is under my name. If you were my age, what would you say or not say when your own brother draws that line? I didn't answer him. I kept my face neutral. The kind of expression you wear when a waiter sets down the wrong plate and you decide you're not hungry enough to start a scene. Derek grinned, like he'd made a harmless joke. Harmless jokes shouldn't leave a mark. This one did. The kind that doesn't photograph. On the drive home, I let the radio stay off. Night collected in the windows. Tail lights stitched a red seam across the road. I focused on simple things, checking mirrors, easing through turns, watching a traffic light switch colors with the certainty of a clock. It felt good to be in a space where rules were clear and nobody argued with physics. At home, I didn't pace or draft speeches. I turned on the tap and waited for the water to run warm. Then let it run a little longer. Steam beaded along the rim of the sink. I rinsed a glass, filled it, and took small sips like I was teaching my body to slow down. The house made its quiet sounds of vent sighing. A floorboard settling. I stood still enough to hear them, and decided stillness would be my reply. The line Derek threw out, too broke, wasn't a number, it was a category. Categories are lazy. They save time at the cost of accuracy. If you put someone in a box, you don't have to notice what doesn't fit the label on the lid. I have lived long enough to know that careful doesn't mean small and quiet doesn't mean weak. But you cannot explain that to a punchline. Punchlines only wait for applause. I went to bed without rehearsing a comeback. In the morning, I woke before the alarm and let the early light do what it does, touch the edges of furniture. Admit the day without fanfare. Routine is not a cage to me, it is scaffolding. I stretched my hands, rolled my shoulders, and made a plain breakfast that didn't sputter or splatter. A clean counter. A plate I could rinse in 3 seconds. There are victories you can't post about, I prefer those. I thought of calling Derek. I even pictured the first sentence. Something forgiving, that would give him an easy exit. That is an old habit, building bridges over gaps I did not make. Then calling it love, when all I've done is spare someone from noticing the drop. I set the idea aside. An apology coached out of a person is theater. And I am done building stages. Work hours passed without drama. I returned messages in short replies that didn't invite twists. I kept my voice even. I didn't check my phone for a burst of clarity that wasn't coming. Control looks different when you stop performing it. It looks like choosing what deserves your energy and keeping the rest outside the fence. Around midday, I caught the echo of his words again and felt the brief heat of wanting to prove him wrong. Proving invites spectators. Records don't. I decided to live in the world of records. That decision didn't need fireworks. It needed follow-through. Afternoon drifted into evening. I stepped outside for a short walk, not to think, but to let the mind idle. Mailboxes stood like small gray shoulders along the curb. A bicycle leaned against a porch rail, patient as furniture. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and gave up. I matched my steps to an easy rhythm and let the temperature settle around me. There's something honest about sidewalks they hold. Whoever shows up. New questions. No, resumes. Back inside. I washed a mug and set it upside down to dry. I wiped a small circle on the table that didn't need wiping. It helped to move my hands. Motion digs a ditch for anger and gives it a place to drain. I didn't want the kind of anger that demands attention. I wanted the kind that burns cleanly and disappears without smoke. Later, when the house went quiet enough to hear the switch of the refrigerator kick on and off, I thought about what people mean when they say family. Sometimes we mean accuracy and care. Sometimes we mean habit and noise. Derek likes noise. It makes a room notice him. I like accuracy. Accuracy doesn't need to be noticed to be true. I brushed my teeth and stood in the doorway for a minute before turning out the light. Old me would have sent a message right then, carefully worded. Toned down. Ready for misinterpretation. New me went to sleep. Sleep is a choice too. By midweek, the edge of his sentence had dulled. It was no longer a knife, more like a piece of gravel in a shoe. You feel it every few steps. Then, not at all. Then again, when you least expect. I didn't stop walking to take off the shoe and show everyone the stone. I adjusted my stride and kept moving. When people asked how I was, I let my answers be small, steady, keeping it simple. The world assumes small answers are evasions. Sometimes they are shelters. I didn't owe anyone a tour of rooms I was repainting. In private, I tried a sentence out loud to see if it could live in my mouth without bitterness. I don't discuss my finances. It fit. It didn't tremble. It carried no invitation to argue. If I needed it later, I would use it once. If I didn't, it could stay what it was, a tool on the bench. Ready. Unflashed. There were moments I imagined Derek's version of events at some table. I couldn't see a quick story with a laugh nailed to the end of it. As if humor could disinfect the part where he reduced me to a category. I felt the tug to balance the ledger right there in my kitchen by drafting a clever counter-story. I let the tug pass. Ledgers balance in offices. Not at dinner parties. Some truths belong to systems. And I was finally ready to trust one. Trust. For me. Looked like ordinary discipline finishing the task in front of me. Not the conversation in my head, letting a notification wait, choosing a lane and staying in it. I used to think dignity was a posture. It's a practice. You repeat it until your body remembers without asking. On the 6th day, I caught my reflection and almost didn't recognize the ease in my shoulders. It wasn't triumph. Triumph wants confetti. This felt more like alignment. Like a picture frame, finally straight, because someone took 60 seconds to measure. Every time I thought about fixing Derek's understanding of me, I asked myself a question. Would the fix create light? Or just heat? Heat is easy. Light takes attention. I saved my attention for what would matter a week from now. The 7th morning arrived without ceremony. I woke early and stood by the window. Not because I expected anything, but because standing there had become a good way to start. The sky had that undecided color it gets before committing today. I made breakfast. I rinsed the plate. I chose clothes I could forget I was wearing. Simple décision. Honest comfort. For the first time since his comment, I felt the space around it. Not an empty space, but the kind you clear on a counter before you roll out dough, a practical space that says this is where something can happen if it needs to. And if it doesn't, the counter will remain clean. I liked that thought. Making space isn't the same as waiting. It's readiness without nerves. If you're looking for a dramatic move here, there isn't one. I didn't march anywhere. I didn't craft a statement. I didn't gather allies. I kept my day ordinary on purpose. Because ordinary is where truth likes to land when it's done traveling. It doesn't look for spotlights. It looks for a level surface. I set my phone down on the table. Screen dark. Not as a dare, but as trust. Whatever needed to reach me would reach me. I didn't have to chase it. I didn't have to brace for it either. There's a middle place between hunting and hiding. That's where I decided to stand. I made a short list, nothing dramatic. Just the bones of the day. Return a call. Take a short walk. Finish a small task I'd delayed for reasons that now seemed silly. I kept the list short, so I wouldn't be tempted to perform productivity. Performing is for audiences. This day didn't have one. And that felt like a gift. In the quiet that followed, I realized what had shifted. I was done auditioning for the people who prefer headlines to details. If Derek wanted a summary, the world had plenty of them. If he wanted accuracy, that required care. And care is not a group sport. So I breathed. The way you do when the doctor tells you to keep still for a moment. In. Out. The house held. The day held. I didn't know what would happen next. And for once that sentence didn't feel like a cliff. It felt like a step. When my phone finally stirred. It was with the calm insistence of a ring that means business. Not a ping. Not a buzz. A ring that separates before from after. I looked at it. Not with fear. Not with victory either. but with the clarity of someone who has already decided how they will behave, regardless of what the world says. I reached for the phone. That year. At 32. I could tell the time by the way my days arranged themselves. Mornings belonged to checklists, late afternoons were for small resets, nights were quiet enough to hear the air move. Nothing about that rhythm made headlines. It kept me honest. Derek and I learned our parts early. At school functions. He found the light, and it found him back. If there was a story to tell, he held the room with big shapes and clean punchlines. I learned the other half of the duet, fill in what was left out. Remember the names. Make sure the chairs got stacked when the room emptied. None of that is glamorous. It does. However, build a spine you can lean on when the day bends. We never sat down and voted on who would be what. Families don't need ballots to assign jobs. They use repetition. Say a thing often enough and the wallpaper learns it. Derek's line "too broke" did not fall from the ceiling. It came from a shelf that had been stocked for years with sentences designed to sound like help, while they shrink you to fit a pocket. He was good at the laugh that arrives with a soft leash attached "I'm only kidding. Don't be so serious." A line that erases the bruise it just made, and then asks you to thank it for the service. I used to comply. The price of peace seemed cheaper than the cost of naming what happened. You pay those bargains in installments, small, regular withdrawals from your willingness to take up space. Our styles collided most plainly when decisions involved money or status. Anything that can be held up to the light. Derek favored momentum. Say it fast. Say it sure. And the room will nod before it thinks. I favor accuracy, slow enough to get the details right. Quiet enough to hear the question inside the question. He calls that nitpicking. I call it not lying. There were scenes over the years that I can replay now with the clarity you get only on the second viewing. A grocery line where he cracked a joke about budgets loud enough for the next aisle. A holiday table where advice arrived like a sermon, short, catchy. Wrong. A parking lot where he tossed a verdict across the roof of his car and sped off before a rebuttal could find its shoes. None of those moments ruined anything by themselves. Together, they taught a lesson: if you don't set your own size, the room will resize you for convenience. I grew efficient at disappearing, politely making conversation easy. Absorbing the stray elbow of a remark. Trimming my sentences, so no one had to make room for them. That skill reads as kindness from the outside. Practice too long. It becomes a form of self-editing. You forget to turn off. You start handing out the short version of yourself before anyone asks. When Derek said what he said about me in houses, the words dropped into a groove that had been worn smooth by years of similar roles. The difference was not the sentence. The difference was me. I had run out of patience for scripts that reward loud certainty and penalize quiet discipline. I decided not to audition for that play again. People think boundaries arrive like barricades. Mine came like posture. I stood up straighter inside my day. I answered questions at their actual size. When someone suggested I lighten up, I let the suggestion pass without offering a laugh to carry it. You don't have to prove your tone to anyone who prefers punchlines to paragraphs. Derek and I are close in age but not in tempo. He expects doors to swing wide when he leans. I check whether the door belongs to me before I touch it. He trusts the room to catch him. I trust schedules and signed lines and the way procedures work when no one's watching. None of that makes me right by default. It does. However, keep me from mistaking volume for evidence. I can trace my preference for accuracy back to ordinary places, forms filled without smudges. Renewals done before they expire. Names spelled correctly the first time. Those habits don't earn applause, they prevent fires. When Derek's comment landed, I didn't reach for a fire hose. I checked whether anything had actually caught. It hadn't. It was smoke without flame. The kind that chokes a room only if you wave it around. You could say we practice different faiths. His if you sound sure. The world will treat you as if you are. Mine if the facts are in order. The outcome does not require a mood. Our arguments, on the rare occasions I let one start, weren't about content so much as about method. He wanted a verdict, I wanted a record. A verdict ends a conversation. A record begins accountability. There's a tendency, when someone close keeps throwing small jabs, To build a case file in your head. Exhibit A. Exhibit B. A numbered ledger of slights and their dates. I refused that job. Not because the exhibits weren't available, but because I do not want to spend my afternoons prosecuting a person I'm related to in a courtroom I invented. I chose a simpler task: respond at scale. Small jab. No performance. Clear line. One sentence. Entire topic that doesn't belong to a shared reality. No entry. In the week after his remark, I walked through rooms with a different attention. You would not have noticed from across the street. Inside, it felt like someone turned the dimmer switch to a level where you can finally see where the corners are. I stopped rounding them for other people's comfort. If a comment had edges, I let them be edges. If a question came loaded, I set it down, unloaded or not at all. I'd love to say this made me generous. It didn't. It made me fair. Fair to myself first. Which is the kind of fairness you need if you expect to be any good at the rest. I kept my promises to my day. Do what's on the list. Don't invent drama to prove you're alive. Let silence do the work you hired it to do. When Derek occupied my thoughts, he did so from a reasonable distance. Like traffic you can hear, but do not have to join. I did not build future conversations in my head. I did not draft speeches no one asked for. I allowed a single hope. Filed under plain language someday. Accuracy. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just accuracy, the simple. Stubborn kind, that doesn't need a witness to stand. I've been told that the calm I project reads as certainty. It isn't. It's practice. Certainty is loud because it's afraid of cracks. Practice is quiet because it expects them and knows what to do. The day Derek said his piece, a crack appeared between who I had been willing to be for peace and who I needed to be to stay whole. I didn't repair the crack with a joke. I let the air in and watched which side of me remained stable. If you asked me to map our relationship in one sentence, I'd say this: Derek speaks in headlines. I live in the details. Headlines move quickly through a room. Details decide how the room is built. When he labeled me with 2 small words, he was writing a headline for a story he never read. I stopped letting people file me under articles they don't intend to finish. So Chapter 2 is not about a dramatic rewrite of the past. It's about stopping mid-scene and choosing to stand elsewhere on the stage, even if the audience can't tell the difference right away. It's about catching myself before I hand over the gentle explanation that lets the other person avoid seeing what they've done. It's about learning that restraint is not hiding. It is care for the parts of you that keep the lights on when the show closes. By the time the 7th day neared, I had adjusted my footing. Same street. Zama schedule. Same number of hours in a day, different use of them. The old choreography tugged at my sleeve once or twice, asking for one more dance. I smiled like you do at a song you used to love, and kept walking. The band can keep playing without me. If there is a single lesson to carry forward from all those earlier scenes, it's this: when people mistake your quiet for emptiness, the solution is not to shout. It is to keep your quiet full of attention, of choice. I want a faith in the kind of truth that doesn't need rehearsals. I didn't plan what would come next. I didn't have to. Order has its own schedule. It arrives when it's ready, and prefers to be met by someone who isn't out of breath from performing. The week didn't arrive as a block. It unspooled thread through a needle. Day by day. I kept my cadence simple on purpose. When you've decided not to perform, time stops demanding a costume change. Day 1 felt like holding a cup with both hands so you don't spill. I woke before the alarm and listened to the kind of quiet that holds small sounds in place. The heater's soft exhale. A pipe adjusting. A neighbor's door, catching, then releasing. I made breakfast. I could finish without thinking, and left the sink clean when I was done. No lectures to myself. No practice speeches for Derek. If a sentence about him tried the door, it found it latched. Work asked the same questions it always asks. I answered in plain language and let messages wait their turn. When afternoon slipped in, I stepped outside and walked a loop around the block. Nothing dramatic happened. A jogger passed. A stroller wheel clicked over a seam in the sidewalk. A delivery driver eased to the curb, and then was gone. I matched the street's humility and felt more like a person than a case file. Day 2 put a small test on the table. Someone asked, casually, how the weekend had gone. I used the truth at the size it needed. Uneventful, I said, and smiled in the shape of a period. The conversation moved on without draft or echo. I liked the way that felt clean edges. No threads to catch on jewelry. I did small maintenance that makes bigger messes unnecessary, later tossed a dead battery. Tightened a loose hinge. Erased a smudge on a wall near the light switch where hands forget themselves. Order is not an aesthetic for me. It's a promise when the moment comes that requires clarity. I won't be hunting for it in clutter. Day 3 woke pride. Pride wanted a project. It suggested I call Derek and teach a masterclass in tone with the calm of a judge and the warmth of a mentor. It even drafted the closing line. I recognized the pitch and let it play to an empty room. Pride misreads the assignment. This is not a courtroom. Not a class. It's a hallway with 2 doors, one marked prove. One marked prepare. I chose the second and kept walking. In the afternoon, I folded laundry with a precision that would make a tailor shrug corners to corners. Sleeves tucked once. Stacks that don't lean. Bored maybe. But boredom is where discipline goes to rest. If I can be kind to myself in an ordinary hour, I'm less likely to go hunting for attention in the hard ones. Day 4 started clumsy. I bumped a glass. Caught it before it met the floor. And felt a flare of adrenaline out of proportion to the save. That flare is the body's way of saying, you've been braced. I exhaled until the tightness loosened. Then I made a small rule for the day. Nothing that can be said in 5 words will be said in 15. It's astonishing how peaceful a day gets when you stop auditioning for clarity. A few times Derek floated through my mind like a station you can hear without tuning. My old reflex wanted to narrate a future conversation where I would be both fair and unforgettable. I let the script dissolve before the second line formed. Scripts need a cast. I have retired. Day 5 brought an invitation to an upcoming gathering, the friendly kind that can turn into a minefield if the wrong sentence wanders in with a smile attached. I didn't embody contingencies. I didn't run simulations. I replied with a sentence that fit in one breath and didn't open extra doors. Boundaries are most effective when they fit on a single line. By noon, the tug to announce myself as actually fine had quieted. I didn't post a summary. I didn't request a witness. I ate lunch, washed the plate, and went back to my list. The day didn't become more interesting because I narrated it. And I didn't become more real because someone else approved my tone. Reality doesn't need moderators. In late afternoon, light fell across the floor, like a ruler. I set a chair leg on it and smiled at the neatness. There are people who thrive on momentum. There are people who thrive on alignment. I am the second kind. Alignment doesn't shout. Doesn't sprint. Doesn't promise the moon. It promises the chair won't wobble when news arrives. Day 6 raised a different doubt. Is staying quiet the same as hiding? I answered with behavior. I kept my schedule. Called back. Who needed calling back? And said no where no belonged. Hiding shrinks you. Quiet centers you. The difference is in your spine. Mine sat straight without strain. Once or twice a sentence tried to sell me urgency. Fix it now. Say something. Make the scene before someone else does. Urgency is a traveling salesperson. It praises your judgment while it empties your drawers. I closed the door with thanks and kept my afternoon. In the early evening, the sky turned the color of a held breath. A kid practiced a skateboard trick down the block shuffle. Hop. Land. Fail. Repeat. On the 3rd try, they laughed at themselves and pushed off again. I learned something standing there. Not every attempt needs an audience to count. Some work is real because you were present for it. Even if the street didn't clap. I washed my face. Turned off a light I'd forgotten. And let the night settle at its own speed. In bed. I didn't rehearse. I counted 4 breaths. Then 4 more. The way you keep time for a song that only you can hear. Sleep arrived like a friend, who who knows the house code and doesn't knock. Day 7 began before the sun decided on a color. I padded to the kitchen, poured water, and watched steam lift in slow. Even streams. The room felt balanced chairs where chairs go. Shoes lined near the door. Surfaces unexcited by the idea of being noticed. I made breakfast and ate it without commentary. I thought, briefly, and about what I would have done a year ago, sprinted to get ahead of the narrative. Translated my choices into a foreign language to fit the room. Called it grace, when it was really anxiety with manners. I'm not that translator anymore. Everyone gets the native tongue of my boundaries. Simple words. No subtitles. Mid-morning moved like a calm river, steady. Unhurried. With room along the banks for news if it chose to arrive. I didn't try to fish it out. I let the water be water. If you are waiting for a triumphant montage, this is not that story. My day looked like any other return, a call. Replace a light bulb. Wipe down a counter. Respond to a message with a sentence that did not apologize for being clear. Nothing photogenic. Everything sustainable. Around noon I stepped outside and let the air take inventory. Not hot. Not cold, honest weather. A dog's collar chinked somewhere out of sight. A utility truck murmured past. Unbothered by the idea of being inspiring. I stood there longer than I needed to, and let the ordinary world remind me that truth doesn't ask for tickets. It shows up in working clothes. Back inside. I sat for a moment and did the smallest kind of math. 7 days. One comment I didn't correct. Dozens of chances to perform that I didn't take. The numbers weren't impressive. The direction was, if discipline has a sound, it's a metronome you eventually forget is on. Afternoon thinned into the kind of quiet I trust. Not the hush that means trouble. The kind that means a space has been cleared and no one is rushing to fill it with noise. I adjusted a frame on the wall that had tilted a degree and laughed at myself for caring. Care is my native language. I speak it now without translating it into charm for someone else's comfort. I set my phone on the table. Not ceremonially. Not as a dare. Face up. Screen dark. The way you leave a porch light off when the moon is enough. If something needed my attention, it would say so. I was not braced, and I was not asleep. I was available to the day on the day's terms. A few minutes later, the room held its breath. The way rooms do when change is almost here. You can feel it, even if you don't believe in that sort of thing, the way air goes still right before a door opens. The sound arrived plain as a period. Not a ping. Not the soft thrum of a reminder. A ring. It cut a clean line between before and after. I didn't flinch. I didn't rehearse a tone. I reached across the table and answered with the same voice I use when accuracy has the floor. Hello. This is Jordan. The ring cut through the room like a pencil, drawing a clean line, one stroke. No flourish. I let it sound twice. Then answered the way I do when accuracy has the floor. Hello. This is Jordan. A professional voice. Steady and warm enough to be human. Good morning. I'm calling from the mortgage company that services an account for Derek Hale. Am I speaking with Jordan Hale? Yes. I said. This is Jordan. Thank you. For security. I'll need to verify a few details. The questions were ordinary spelling of my name. A basic contact item I recognized. A piece of information that made sense in context. The caller's rhythm was practiced, no rush. No filler. Each step like a rung on a ladder, placed at the correct angle. I answered without embroidery. Appreciate that. The voice continued. I'm calling regarding the property associated with Derek Hale's mortgage account. According to our records, the title, the deed of ownership, is recorded under your name. The room didn't move. But something in it aligned like a picture, settling straight after years of being almost right. I didn't fill the space with words. Clarity deserves quiet around it. I understand. I said. To confirm. The caller added. Our servicing records indicate you are the recorded owner for the property associated with Mr. Derek Hale's loan. This call is to verify we've reached the correct party on record. Understood, I said again. My voice sounded even. Not because I'd rehearsed it, but because I'd already decided who I would be when this moment arrived. Do you have any questions for me today? New questions, I said. Thank you for the confirmation. If you need a formal letter through our standard channels, customer support can assist. The caller offered in the same neutral cadence. No pressure. No script beyond accuracy. Is there anything else I can help you with? That's all. Thanks. You're welcome. Have a good day. A soft click. The sonic equivalent of a period. I held the phone for a breath after the line went quiet, watching the dark screen reflect a small, ordinary version of my face. Not triumphant. Not stunned. Aligned. There is a difference. Triumph asks for witnesses. Alignment holds without applause. Around me, the day resumed its humble industry. A vent exhaled. A distant truck rolled through a gear and kept going. Somewhere a neighbor shut a door with the confidence of a latch that knows its job. I set the phone down and let my hands rest on the table. Palms open. As if the moment had weight, and I was choosing not to grip it. The words from a week ago wandered back, 2 short ones. Long echo. They didn't sting. They didn't even argue. They simply met a new fact and stood beside it. Smaller by comparison. People think justice is noisy. Sometimes it's the quiet sound a file makes when it finds the right folder. Reflex whispered the old temptations. Tell someone. Craft a line. Teach a lesson. All of those paths led to a stage I had retired. The record was enough. Records are patient. They do not ask to be admired. They ask to be kept. I walked to the sink and ran water. Not because a dish needed it, but because the ordinary is where you put your hands when a door in your life closes correctly. The stream turned clear sooner than I expected. I shut it off and listened to the small hush that followed. The way sound steps back when it has delivered what it came to say. If I were a different person, I might have called Derek right then, offered a tidy explanation. A chance for him to step gracefully onto truth without noticing the gap he had created. That is a talent I've carried too long. I am letting it go. You can't teach someone to read a record they refuse to open. You also don't have to hold the book up for them and read it aloud. Instead, I thought in simple pairs what changed. What didn't. What changed a system, spoke, in its own language, and placed my name where names matter. What didn't my plan for the day? My choice to avoid theater. My boundary against explanations no one earned. A message pinged from a friend about something unrelated, errands. Timing. The ordinary knots that keep a week together. I answered with a line that fit, then put the phone face up on the table. Not a dare. Not a trophy. Just a device at rest. I tried on a sentence in my head and set it down again. Let the record speak. It didn't need to be said out loud. The work of the sentence was already complete. Saying it would only turn it into decoration. And I have decided my life is not a showroom. By mid-morning, the adrenaline that moments like this carry had thinned to a clean attentiveness. I took a short walk. Not for symbolism. Just for air. The street looked like itself, trash bins aligned neatly at the curb. A cyclist coasting. A mailbox door shut, with a practiced nudge. I wasn't looking for omens. I was letting the body remember how to be a body, when the mind has just been handed a fact. On the way back, I pictured the difference between argument and record with a metaphor simple enough to keep. Argument is weather. Record is climate. Weather throws a tantrum. Climate is the sum of many measured days. I am choosing climate. It does not deny storms. It refuses to let a storm declare the truth of a place. Inside again. I kept to the shape of an ordinary day. Answered a message. Crossed off a task. Sat for a minute and watched light make its slow decision across the floor. If anyone had walked in, they would have seen nothing urgent. That was accurate. Urgency had left the room when the voice on the phone did its job. I considered the question people love to ask in stories. How did it feel? The honest answer is uncinematic. It felt like finally sitting in a chair that had always been mine and discovering the legs were even. No music. No spotlight. Just a seat that doesn't wobble. Around lunchtime, I made space for a thought. I had tried to avoid the part of me that still wants Derek to know me with accuracy. Not headlines. I let the want stand there without a speech or a leash. You can want something and still refuse to perform for it. Wanting is not a contract. It's a weather report. You dress accordingly and go about your day. The rest of the afternoon flowed on rails. Ordinary messages. Ordinary tasks. Ordinary breaths. I chose each sentence I sent with the care I now reserve for simple things short. Clear. At the size of the question asked. I was not reducing myself. I was refusing to create detours. Once, while wiping a harmless ring of water from the table, I imagined an alternate version of this day, the one where I crafted a note for Derek so he could discover the news wrapped in grace I had paid for. The picture dissolved on contact. Grace that costs your boundary is not grace. It's a subsidy for someone else's comfort. I don't know what Derek will say or think when the truth reaches him through whatever path truths prefer. That ignorance used to feel like a draft under a door. Today it felt like privacy, not a secret. A room I'm allowed to live in without narrating it for anyone standing outside. Late afternoon. The house's sounds gathered themselves into a familiar pattern, the low teamwork of a space keeping you company. I sat with that and let the quiet do its work. If there is a lesson I would keep from this day, it is not about winning. It is about willingness to trust systems where they are competent. To trust your choices where systems are loud. To trust silence to carry what victory would only sensationalize. Evening came on without asking permission. I welcomed it by doing what I always do, turn one light on. Then another. In an order, my hands remember. Routine is not denial here. It's gratitude, thanks paid in small installments to a life that no longer needs a spotlight to prove it exists. I did not raise a glass. I did not draft a speech. I did not diagram a future scene. I let the day settle and promised myself the only thing I know how to keep. I will continue as I began, no explanations. No theater. Aligned with a fact that does not wobble when no one is looking. The phone lay quiet again. The kind of quiet a finished sentence leaves behind. Outside. Somewhere. A gate clicked. Somewhere. A laugh carried and faded. Here. The center held. That was enough. Morning arrived with the soft confidence of a light that knows where the switches are. After the call, the house felt balanced, same walls. Steadier frame. I didn't dress the day in celebration. I let it wear work clothes. On the fridge hangs a plain monthly grid I fill with pencil. I stood there a minute. Not to add anything grand, but to erase 2 words I no longer needed, explain later. The square looked cleaner without them. I drew a small line through the hour where I usually overtalk and replaced it with a box that simply read rest. I made breakfast in quiet motions, pan warmed just enough. Bread browned to the color of good toast. A glass of water at arm's length. I have learned that boundary is a temperature, not a speech. Keep the heat steady and nothing scorches. Messages blinked awake while I ate. None of them were urgent, most days aren't. I answered the few that asked clear questions and let the rest sit without apology. A pause is a sentence that respects itself. I used to fill pauses with context. Little verbal cushions so the other person wouldn't feel the hard edge of my no. Today I let the edge be honest. I had promised myself 3 rules for the aftermath. Though I never wrote them down, speak only the amount the moment requires. Leave a share of silence in every exchange. Keep news private unless privacy endangers someone. The call hadn't changed those rules. It had simply confirmed they were worth keeping. Mid-morning. A relative texted about a small gathering the following week. These are the rooms where old patterns like to test their range, harmless jokes with stingers tucked inside. Applause for certainty. Polite weather over muddy ground. I read the invitation twice. Then sent a reply that fit on one line and didn't invite negotiations. The phone buzzed once with a thumbs up. No further bargaining arrived. Which told me something simple. Often, It is our extra words that open the door for extra demands. I stepped out for a walk, chose a new route, and counted intersections instead of steps 4 blocks north. 2 east, 3 south, 1 west. The geometry steadied me. A boy practiced layups at a driveway hoop. The ball struck backboard. Rim. Then hand again. I admired the repetition, no audience. Just form. Boundaries are like that. You make the same good motion until the body remembers. Back home. I stood at the kitchen counter with a stack of mail and a timer. 15 minutes. No more. I sorted what mattered, recycled what didn't, and refused to keep envelopes out of guilt. I used to hoard papers the way I hoarded conversations, just in case. Just for later. Just so no one could say I wasn't prepared. Later rarely arrives the way you imagine. Prepared is a habit, not a storage unit. Around noon, I felt the quick spark that used to send me reaching for Derek's comfort. First, the urge to keep the peace by cushioning the truth. I let the spark burn out in air. The truth now had its own cushion, the record. It didn't need my padding. I ate standing at the counter. Simple food. Not ceremony. While I chewed, I practiced a sentence I could carry into any room without weaponizing it. I don't talk about my money. It fit in one breath and didn't tremble. The point of a boundary is not to win. It is to stand where you can keep standing. Afternoon found me at the hall closet with a small task swap, winter things to the back. Leave what I actually use within reach. I touched each item once. Decided. And moved on. That rhythm touch. Decide. Move worked on more than coats. It worked on talks I no longer owe. It worked on favors that once came disguised as duties. It worked on the old job of translating myself into a friendlier dialect for people who prefer summaries to details. A friend called to ask how the week was. The kind voice of a person who doesn't mind for drama. Uneventful, I said. Which was both true and the point. We spoke about errands. A good recipe. A leaky faucet. This, too, is a boundary, letting the ordinary stay ordinary when you could turn it into proof. In the late afternoon, I sat at the table with an empty legal pad. Not to make lists, but to sketch a small map, 3 circles that touched at the edges: privacy, clarity, pace. I placed my name in the intersection and wrote a single line beneath it: keep the pace that keeps you clear. The pad wasn't a shrine. It was a reminder that I no longer sprint to meet other people's clocks. Old muscles tried their old tricks. A thought floated in: what if Derek hears the news from someone else and decides his version is better? I let the thought walk around the room without offering it a chair. People will do what they do. The difference now is I won't audition for their approval before they do it. Evening brought chores that don't make for stories: shaking out a rug on the back steps, rinsing the sink until the water ran clean, taping a small tear in a paper bag so it could hold one more use. I find relief in salvage. Not everything worth keeping needs to be brand new. You can save a thing with attention and call it good. I paused at the calendar again and drew a thin line through a weekend hour I had been guarding for possible family duties. In its place I wrote walk. If I go to that gathering, I will go because I choose it. Arrive late. Leave early. And keep my sentences at the size of my comfort. If I don't, I won't apologize to the air for the shape of my absence. I haven't spoken much about anger because it didn't ask for a microphone today. When it does, I give it container workyard clippings into bags. A stubborn jar opened with a towel. A rug straightened so the corner doesn't curl and trip someone. Anger likes to feel useful. If you hand it tasks, it tires and goes to bed on time. A small temptation rose near sundown: send a polished message to Derek that would allow him to step onto the right side of the line without acknowledging the wrong one. That is choreography. I know too well. I pictured where it ends me, managing tone. Him managing image. The truth sent to fetch coffee. I put the phone in a drawer for an hour and let the urge lose interest in me. Night came on gentle. I turned on one lamp, then another. I watered a plant and felt the quiet accept this as dialogue. Somewhere on the block. A screen door snapped, then settled. The day made a simple case for itself, nothing explosive. Everything aligned. Before bed, I stood in the doorway and took inventory like a shopkeeper, with no rush, surfaces clear enough to breathe. Counters without arguments. A table that could host a meal or a conversation without asking me to shrink first. That was the measure that mattered. Not who knew the news. Not who might spin it. Whether my own rooms told me the truth when I looked at them. I thought about the phrase people lean on when they want an ending, case closed. That isn't quite right for this. Case is closed with gavel knocks and speeches. This felt more like doors hung level and hinges oiled. You still open and close them. But now they don't scrape. If there is advice hidden in this chapter, it's not a slogan, it's a posture, shoulders low. Breath even. Answers short enough to carry without dropping. The call gave me a fact. I give myself pace. Between those two, there is enough life to live well. In bed, I didn't rehearse. I set an alarm for the same time as always and turned the screen away. I lay there listening to the house finish its small evening chores, the heater's last sigh. A neighbor's car, easing into a spot. The thin tick of something cooling. None of it asked me to perform. All of it let me rest. Tomorrow will look like this one, if I'm lucky, plain tasks. Honest sentences. A calendar that reflects choices instead of fear. If luck wavers, the rules hold. Speak the amount required. Leave space in each exchange. Share news only when safety demands it. Keep the pace that keeps you clear. I closed my eyes and let sleep arrive without ceremony. Boundaries don't need applause. They need repetition. I will give them that. The weeks that followed were quiet in the useful way, like a library at opening hour. Lights warming row by row. I didn't change my life. I stopped asking it to audition. That turned out to be enough. Mornings found me before the alarm. Not out of urgency, but because the body loves rhythm. Once you stop punishing it for being predictable, I stretched the stiffness out of my shoulders, counted a slow breath, and let the day assemble itself without fanfare. Breakfast was a small, steady ritual, nothing dramatic. Just fuel laid out with the calm of someone who no longer needs a narrative to eat. I learned to measure success by how little I had to explain. A good day looked like this: messages answered in plain lines. Tasks finished at their natural size. No extra doors opened with unnecessary context. My sentences shortened without becoming sharp. Yes. That time works? No. I'm not available. Thank you for letting me know. Civility became architecture, not costume. Outside, the neighborhood practiced its own habits. The crosswalk chirped its slow metronome. A school bus exhaled at the corner and gathered itself again. A dog owner in a windbreaker waved at no one in particular and kept moving. People underestimate what these small certainties do for a person. They remind you that truth isn't an event. It's the sum of days that hold. Workdays settled into lanes. I kept notes I could read later and refused to decorate them with future arguments. I stopped rehearsing what I'd say if someone challenged my boundary. Rehearsal is a hungry pet. If you feed it, it grows big enough to run the house. I fed the day instead, one assignment at a time. Signed off when it was signed off. Then let the work live where it belongs on the list. Not in my chest. Sometimes the urge to perform came back wearing new clothes. It suggested an update to a friend that would place me in a flattering light. It offered a generous message to Derek that would cost me more than it comforted him. I treated those urges like solicitations at the door open. Listen. Decline. Close. No sermon. No slam. Just the calm refusal of someone who knows what's for sale and isn't buying. On Wednesdays, I started walking a longer loop down one block that smells like wet concrete after sprinklers, across a small footbridge that complains under bicycles, up a street where porches seem to eavesdrop on their own conversations. Midway, there's a bench with peeling paint. I let myself sit there, not as a reward, but because sitting is part of moving. A runner clipped past with headphones. Each step a proof of practice. I have different proof. But the principle is the same: repetition until alignment. At home, I made small upgrades that didn't cost much and paid back in ease: a hook where a coat always fell, a tray for keys that used to roam, a lamp angled so night didn't arrive all at once. Order is not a personality, it is hospitality for your future self. When tomorrow shows up, it shouldn't have to search for the basics. Some evenings, a sliver of doubt showed up right on time. "Are you being avoidant?" it asked, as if it were the most reasonable voice in the room. I checked my behavior against the simplest chart I know. Am I telling the truth at the size of the moment? Am I honoring commitments I actually made? Am I refusing to invent work for emotions I don't want? The answers were steady. Avoidance hides. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing. I noticed how my body kept the score of this new posture. Jaw unclenched on its own. Shoulders lived lower. The breath that used to pause before it passed didn't need convincing anymore. There is a rumor that calm is the absence of caring. The opposite is true. Calm is care distributed wisely. Once, while rinsing a cutting board, I caught myself drafting a letter in my head, the elegant kind that lands soft and still says everything. I smiled at the usefulness of that old skill and let it go down the drain with the soap. I keep the talent. I reject the assignment. If a letter is ever needed, the record will ask for it. Not my pride. Phone calls became lighter because I removed performance from them. I answered questions directly and didn't pad my no with apologies that invite negotiation. People adjust faster than you think when you stop cushioning the truth. They build their own cushions or learn to sit on a firmer chair. Either outcome is not my problem to solve. A friend invited me to a weeknight dinner. I said yes because the invitation felt like a table, not a test. We talked about nothing that would trend a recipe that didn't work, a movie that did, a pothole that finally got fixed. On the way home, I realized why the evening felt restful. No one tried to turn my life into a panel discussion. Quiet companionship is a form of success that never makes the highlight reel. It should. The part of me that still wants Derek to know me accurately didn't vanish. It stopped shouting. It sat beside me like weather present, not in charge. If it grew restless, I gave it helpful chores: take out the recycling, set a reminder to check the smoke alarm, wipe the windowsill where dust settles like a soft mistake. Not because chores cure anything, but because movement keeps me from building imaginary courtrooms where I win a trial that never takes place. On a Saturday, I cleaned the trunk of my car. 2 bungee cords, a blanket that had been trying to become a nest, a small toolkit with a screwdriver that always hides under something heavier. I put each item where it made sense. My mind followed suit. Facts in their lane, feelings in theirs, choices on the workbench, not scattered across the floor. You learn how much thinking is wasted on looking for what you've misplaced. I kept up my rule about money talk. I don't do it. When the topic wandered close at a casual catch-up, I redirected it so softly that the other person didn't feel slighted. "I'm focusing on other things," I said, and asked about a project they'd actually enjoy describing. Boundaries don't have to announce themselves. They can convert the conversation without revealing the formula. There were small victories I didn't tweet to anyone, an afternoon nap I didn't justify, a list completed without a flourish, a repair handled before it became a problem. I started rating days by how aligned they felt rather than the volume of their news. News is showy. Alignment pay dividend quietly. One evening, I returned from a walk and stood in the hallway long enough to hear the house breathe, the low teamwork of vents and pipes, and the distant tick of something cooling. It sounded like a life that didn't need rescuing. I used to be the person who manufactured emergencies to prove I could solve them. The new rule is simpler: don't light fires, you'll only have to put out. Every so often, curiosity knocked. What does Derek know? I let the question sit on the porch. It can wait until the mail arrives with whatever it plans to bring. The impulse to manage other people's timelines is a kind of theft. You steal hours from your own day and call it care. I am done with that charity. If a message from family landed in my inbox, I read it once and replied in language that could stand on its own legs. I didn't over-clarify or translate myself into a flavor everyone would like. We are adults. we can eat food that isn't sugared. And if someone tried to sprinkle sweetness over a difficult truth, I didn't lick it off to be polite. Late in the second week, I realized I hadn't checked the clock while making dinner. The pan knew when to be turned. The water knew when to boil. My hands knew the pace without consulting a judge. This is what competence feels like when you stop begging it to prove itself unremarkable. Accurate. Free. I kept a promise to myself to leave space in the calendar that belonged to no one. I used some of that space to do nothing with intent, sit by a window. Count 3 slow breaths. Let the mind idle like an engine at a light that will turn green when it's time. Doing nothing is not laziness when it protects the part of you that does the real work. As for the record, it lived elsewhere in a system I didn't operate. On a server I would never see. I didn't need to stare at the idea of it to feel its weight. That's the odd comfort of facts once they land. They don't require supervision. Your job is not to hover. Your job is to walk in a way that matches what has already been named. People asked. Here and there. If I felt vindicated, the word tasted like a borrowed jacket. It didn't fit across the shoulders. I told them I felt steady, which is less exciting and more useful. Steady gets you through a Tuesday afternoon without turning it into proof of anything except itself. By the end of those weeks, I understood something I had only suspected. Quiet is not the absence of a story. It is the setting that lets the right one develop. I don't need a climax every chapter. I need a spine. The call gave me a bone to attach to. The rest breath. Muscle. Balance was my work. So I kept my pace. I kept my sentences short enough to carry. I kept my care for the parts of life that never trend clean forks. On-time renewals. Names spelled right. Doors that open when you ask, and close without complaint when you're done. None of this proves anything. It doesn't have to. It holds. When night came, it arrived the way I like it to gradually. Room by room. As if the house were dimming itself with good manners. I turned off the last light and felt the kind of tired that doesn't ask you to explain why. Tomorrow would be similar if I did my job. That has become the definition of success, an ordinary day. Replicated with care. Untempted by performance. Aligned with a fact that doesn't wobble when no one is clapping. The test of a decision is not the day you make it, it's the dull Tuesday when no one is watching. That's where quiet justice happens between errands. Inside small choices that don't audition for applause. I built a simple routine. Less like a manifesto and more like a checklist, only I needed to see. Mornings a walk before the neighborhood fully wakes. 3 blocks out and back. Midday answer, what's mine to answer? Skip what's fishing for a performance. Evenings close the day without staging a finale. A life can run on that kind of fuel indefinitely. Friends asked how things were in the way. Friends do gentle. Not prying. I gave them the truth at the right size. Steady. I said. Keeping the pace. Nobody pressed. People usually press when you leave air they think needs filling. I wasn't leaving air. I was leaving room. I handled family messages like a line. Cook handles. Orders read the ticket. Do what's required. Ring the bell. I didn't decorate plates that didn't need garnish. If a question arrived that really meant, perform your competence, I answered with a sentence that could stand without crutches. That won't work for me. Here's what I can do. The conversation either adjusted or ended. Both outcomes were acceptable. Quiet justice is maintenance. Not revenge. Not reveal. Not victory laps. It's remembering the principle and letting practice do the rest. The principle was simple. The record exists. Because it exists. I don't have to. Not in the way I used to, hovering over impressions. Refereeing tone. Issuing clarifications no one earned. The record isn't fragile. It will be there tomorrow. And the day after. My job is to act like that's true. So I gave the weak tasks that kept me honest. One evening I set a kitchen timer for 20 minutes and worked through a stack of postponed chores, light bulb replaced. Loose scruff snugged. A wobbly chair leg tightened until it sat properly. It wasn't symbolic. It was execution. Things should hold. If they don't, fix what's yours without press releases. Another afternoon brought a minor social test. A mutual acquaintance texted about a casual get-together. Those rooms are where old patterns like to audition. Someone sets a little joke loose and watches who feeds it. I pictured the scene, easy laughter glued to a verdict. The kind that sounds like generosity if you ignore the teeth. I answered with brevity. Can't make that one hope it's a good night. No apology. No alternate date offered as tribute. A no that doesn't bleed is a skill you only learn by practicing it. On a weekend morning, I drove out to a small park and chose a bench with flaking paint. A pickup game of basketball clattered on the court, sneakers scuffed. A ball found the backboard. Missed. Found it again? No scorekeeper. Just bodies learning angles. That's how this part of my life felt, not a season with standings, but a practice. Show up. Work the drill. Leave better at the thing that matters form. Not flair. I had expected anger to keep pacing the hallway. It didn't. When it knocked, I put it to work on something useful, sweeping grit from the entry. Clearing out a trunk that had become a soft disaster. Anger finished the chore and, like a tired dog, curled up and slept. I didn't scold it or breed it for sport. I let it help and then rest. Sometimes people confuse silence with withholding. I used to. 2. Withholding is a ledger you intend to present. Silence is closing the ledger because the math is finished. I wasn't saving up a case to slam on a table. I had set down the calculator. The sum was the sum. I could live by it without reciting it. A cousin called to chat about ordinary things, a garden that refused to thrive. A minor leak that finally got fixed. When the conversation drifted near money, I did what I've learned to do, steer to firmer ground without announcing the steering. I'm focusing on other parts of life, I said, and asked about the garden soil. We talked about shade and patience. Not a euphemism. A value. I kept an eye on my own reflexes. There's one that loves to write clarifying paragraphs where a comma will do. I starved it. Short sentences made good neighbors. Yes? No. Not this week. The quiet that followed wasn't empty, it was structural. You can hang a day on it. Inside the house. I fine-tuned small things, because small things add up to air, you can breathe. I moved a tray so keys stopped migrating, placed a hook where a coat usually slumped, shifted a lamp so evenings softened instead of vanishing. None of this proves anything to anyone else. It proves something to me. I show care where I live. Not where I'm graded. A memory ambushed me mid-errand Derek laughing after another one-liner years ago. The kind that turns a person into a category with a bow on top. The old ache arrived, wanting to be seen accurately. Not gloriously. Accurately. The ache made its case and sat down. I didn't bargain with it. Bargaining leads to drafts. Drafts lead to performances. I don't write that genre anymore. Later. At a crosswalk. I told myself the simplest truth. I know I'm not responsible for passing the record around the room like a plate. If people want a serving, they can get it from the kitchen where facts are kept. My job is to eat what is mine and leave the plates that are not. The light changed. I crossed. There were temptations disguised as generosity. Send him a message that gives him an easy exit. That's not generosity. That's subsidy with interest charged to me. I declined the transaction and went on with my day, which asked, as days do. For ordinary competence, a bill paid, a firm double-checked. A reminder set for something unglamorous and essential. When doubt questioned whether I was avoiding, I answered with the clearest evidence available behavior. I returned the calls I owed. I kept the plans I made. I didn't invent tasks to justify boundaries. Avoidance hides. I was in plain sight, just not performing. A neighbor waved as we both took out trash. We exchanged the light talk that keeps a block-friendly weather. As Apotol patched. A holiday around the corner. Community doesn't require confessionals. It requires consistency. I can deliver that. One evening, I laid out the next day on a single index card, 3 lines. 3 verbs. No flair. No underlines. I place the card by the door I use in the morning. Not a ritual. Just logistics. Quiet justice loves logistics. It doesn't sprint. It arrives on time because you left in time. I kept waiting for the part where I'd feel triumphant and realized I'd misnamed the goal. Triumph is for crowds. Alignment is for Tuesday. I didn't need a high. I needed a floor that didn't tilt when no one was clapping. The floor held. In a phone chat, a friend asked, almost apologetically, whether I'd ever tell Derek. I said something that surprised even me. If the moment needs words, I have them. If it doesn't, I won't force them into the room. That's execution. Not evasion speaking, at the size of the need, instead of the size of the ego. I learned to enjoy the parts of competence that don't photograph well, labeling a box so future me won't rummage, putting tools back where they belong, setting a small reminder that a filter needs changing in a month. None of this is story fuel. All of it is life fuel. Nights ended earlier. Not from fatigue. From peace. There's a particular tired that comes from not pretending clean. Unsticky. The kind that lets sleep arrive without bargaining. I turned off lights in the same order. Listen to the house. Finish what houses finish. And let the day close, like a book you plan to open again because the pages do their job. If there's a definition for how I executed, it is uneventful on purpose. I did not call. Did not hint. Did not recruit witnesses. Did not turn a fact into spectacle. I maintained the system within my control calendar. Conversations. Choices, so the system beyond my control could keep doing its job. Which it had already done. The rest of it, the longing for accuracy, the curiosity about who knows what can walk around the block until it's tired. I have work to do that doesn't require an audience. And on days when the old script tried to slip back on like a jacket I used to wear, I checked the fit. Too tight across the shoulders. Too loud in the cuffs. I hung it back up where it belongs, not on me. The week finished without a headline, and felt complete anyway. No announcements. No after-action report. Just a set of minutes that added up to hours that added up to a person who didn't need to prove a thing to be real. Quiet justice doesn't unfurl a banner. It turns off the light. Locks the door that needs locking. And leaves the right key where the right hands can find it. I did that. Then I went to bed. Resolution didn't arrive with a verdict slam. It showed up like a sunrise on a cloudy morning light, finding its way through ordinary gaps. I kept to my schedule and discovered that steadiness can be its own announcement. No banners. No speeches, just days that hold. In the weeks after I chose maintenance over theater, I learned a gentler kind of attention. It began with small permissions. I let myself read in the quiet half hour before dinner, without converting the act into self-improvement. I let dishes air dry, instead of polishing them for an audience that didn't exist. I let a conversation end on a period, rather than dragging it toward a moral. Nothing about this is grand. Everything about it is sustainable. There were moments when the old habit tried to return my mind, drafting a summary for Derek. An elegant paragraph that would allow him to step across the line without looking down at the gap he made. I let the paragraph float until it thinned out. I've learned that not every beautiful sentence deserves a job. Some can retire with honors. People asked, now and then, how things finally turned out. As if lives land in categories the way books do. I gave them the answer that fits in the mouth without wobbling. I'm settled. The word does not sparkle. It lands like a stone with the right weight. Settled does not mean solved. It means the ground holds. On a mild evening, I walked a different route and found a small overlook where the street sloped away in a tidy grid. Porch lights winked on, one after another, as if responding to a cue no one could hear. I leaned on the railing and listened to a city at peace with itself, tires soft against pavement, a sprinkler ticking. A laugh carried half a block, then dropped. None of those sounds needed me. That realization felt like relief. Not exile. The world is not a stage that waits for your monologue. It's a set of rooms you tend. A few people you love. A handful of rules you keep when no one is clapping. Quiet justice is often mistaken for passivity. It isn't. It is precision saying what is true at the size of the moment and refusing to enlarge it for effect. The call had already done. The enlargement people crave big fact. Clear line. My job was not to turn that line into fireworks. My job was to live at a pace that matched it. I experimented with that pace. When a message asked for a quick chat about a topic, I know spills into judgments. I declined without footnotes. When an invitation felt like a room where truth would be forced to wear a costume, I sent regards and stayed home. Declining without apology was a new muscle. The first few reps trembled. Then they didn't. I kept one promise across these weeks: no rehearsals for a confrontation. I had no intention of staging. Rehearsal mimics control. But it's only worry with good lighting. I saved my lighting for dinners I could cook correctly. For a floor that needed sweeping. For a plant that tilted toward the nearest window and deserved better placement. If that sounds unambitious, you have never lived a week without pretending. It is its own ambition to let a day be a day. Sometimes the ache showed up the wish for Derek to know me as I am. Not as a headline with a joke pinned to the end. I did not shame the wish or feed it. I gave it a chair by the door and reminded it that visitors don't get to redecorate. It sat, behaved, and left when it was ready. That, too, is resolution, not the absence of longing, but the end of bargaining with it. One afternoon I overheard two neighbors debating the best way to fix a gate. One favored a quick brace and paint. The other insisted on rehanging the posts so weight would distribute true. It struck me how much of life is that choice: brace or rehang. The call had rehung the posts. I didn't need to keep painting the brace to feel safe. I thought about the difference between apology and repair. Apology is a sentence. Repair is a calendar full of unchanged behavior. I stopped wishing for sentences that only sound correct and started appreciating silence that behaves. If Derek ever offers accuracy, I have a simple line that fits in one breath. That comment didn't land well. Said once. Not thrown. If he never asks, the line can rest. Preparedness is not an invitation. What changed most was not my opinion of my brother. It was my opinion of my job. I had, without noticing, taken employment as the translator, the softener, the docent of my own decisions. I resigned. The company will be fine without me. There is plenty of work in running my own small country. Keep the borders humane and firm. Maintain infrastructure. Collect no taxes from the part of me that wants to sit quietly and read. By the end of the month, an ease settled in my shoulders that I did not feel the need to photograph. I recognized it when a friend asked an open question, and I didn't sprint to fill it. The pause felt like shade on a hot sidewalk, useful. Unremarkable. There when needed. People who love you learn the shape of your shade. The rest can walk in the sun. The lesson I carry forward fits on a single card: let records do their work. Let your choices match them. Release the urge to narrate yourself into someone else's comfort. You can be accurate and kind at the same time. But when you must choose, be accurate first. Kindness built on distortion collapses as soon as it's leaned on. I keep thinking of a crosswalk I use on my longer route. It chirps whether anyone hears it or not. That is the dignity I want, the kind that doesn't calibrate itself to an audience. You set your pace. If you wait your turn. If you cross when it's time. If a driver doesn't see you. If you step back. Not because you were wrong to walk, but because you plan to be alive tomorrow. There is a temptation in stories to crown a winner. I don't know who would wear the crown here. And I don't think the story requires one. Crowns imply a contest. What happened was a correction. Systems, when they function, correct. People, when they listen, adjust. I can't control the second half. I can align with the first. So here is the message I would leave on the kitchen table for anyone who recognizes their own life in this one, especially if you've lived long enough to see how sharp a joke can be when it's thrown at the soft part of your day. You don't owe a performance to earn accuracy. Silence can be a tool, not a weapon. Boundaries fit best when they fit in a breath. Let facts find their file. Let your life match, not magnify. Save your energy for the work that remains when applause is gone. Meals. Que repairs. Steady company. The dignity of a well-kept pace. On the last evening of this chapter, I stood by the window while the street chose its night sounds. I didn't count accomplishments. I counted breaths. In, out. A porch light. A distant gate. A door shutting with a confidence I trust. Nothing in that scene needed my interpretation to be true. I take comfort in that. If Derek appears in some future chapter, I will meet him at my current size. Not bigger to intimidate. Not smaller to fit. If he does not appear, the page will not feel incomplete. The story will be what it has become, an account of a person who stopped auditioning, kept a pace that kept them clear, and let a record stand where records stand. Resolution. For me? Is this? I can set the table in my own home and sit at it without narrating to the empty chair why I deserve the seat. The meal tastes better that way. The evening passes without argument. The night arrives on time. I turn off the lamp and let the dark take its rightful place. No curtains fall. No applause rises. A day ends the way it should, quiet. Accurate. Ready to be repeated. Tomorrow will come with its errands and its crosswalks and its small choices. I will keep the ones that keep me. That is enough.